This morning I was discussing the joke of death. This morning I was discussing the joke of death. And the principal point that I was making was that death and life, or that is to say, in other words, the interval and the event, death being the interval between events, between one appearance and another of human beings, in the same way as winter is the interval between the appearance of the leaves in spring and their disappearance in the fall. But there is, you see, the chronic fear that the interval may be all that there is, that the interval may triumph, and there may be no event. And I was trying to show you that there is a polarity between the event and the interval between events, in such a way that you can no more have the one without the other than you can have the crest of the wave without the trough. And that this goes on and on and on in endless cycles, where there are small intervals making up small intervals and waves, which group together and make up a set of intervals and waves, and they in themselves constitute the crest of a larger wave with a much longer trough. And then again there comes the group of intervals and waves on a short rhythm. And that this thing that goes like, you see, like this, you see, that this thing in its turn is the crest of a still greater wave, and that the nature of being is that this is the scheme of things. But the joke about it, what makes it exciting, is the constant anticipation that there might not be anything again after the interval, that it might all come to an end. And the real problem, in order to turn death into a joke, that is to say, suddenly to recover from this terrible anxiety that it might be finished, and then transmute the vibration trembling of anxiety into laughter. It is the same thing. Only the trembling of laughter is the trembling of anxiety seen from a different point of view. Now, what are the things that are obstacles to our being able to see that? It's almost as if life were itself a guru. And you know how gurus throw out tests to their students to see if they can pass these various initiations, all of which require nerve in the face of some formidable obstacle. All fairy stories are full of this. And so life itself throws out all kinds of reasons for supposing that we are faced with something serious instead of something playful. And I want to discuss with you a few ways which in Western history this obstacle has been thrown out, and how we today are bamboozled by these obstacles. In the history of Western civilization, there have really been, in the past 2,000 years, two dominant mythologies. One has had a long run and the other has had a fairly short run. But they are both ways of terrifying you so that you won't see the point. But at the same time, they are perhaps not merely negative things, but challenges, barriers of the same kind that a guru would offer. For example, in the study of Zen, each koan is referred to as a barrier. And if you can pass the barrier, you see, you get in. But the function of the teacher is to put the barriers up to see how you'll react to them. So, in a way, we could say that the two great mythologies which have dominated the Western world in the past 2,000 years are two barriers. The first, of course, is the Christian mythology. And in the Christian mythology, the individual is made to feel that he is strictly on probation, that he does not really belong, that if he is at all a son of God, he is so by adoption and grace. He isn't really one of the family. Let me explore the theology of that a moment. In Christian theology, God has only one son. The monogenes, or the only begotten Son of God, who is the second person of the Trinity, the Logos, the divine idea of itself. The Trinity constitutes a family. And naturally, it's therefore threefold, because all, for the Greek mind, and it was the Greek mind that molded Christian theology, meaning entirely depends on the structure of the Greek language. And Greek, in common with all Western languages, and indeed also Sanskrit, from which it is derived, has a sentence structure in which there is the subject, the verb, and the predicate. And we can't make any sense without those three things. We have to have an I love you or an I know you sentence for there to be any love or for there to be any knowledge. There must be the lover. The lover can't love without having a beloved, and the lover doesn't relate to the beloved without the relationship of love between them. So there you have the subject, the predicate, and the verb. And so naturally, in Greek ideas, the very inner nature of reality of the Godhead itself must be threefold, following the structure of Greek thought and Greek grammar. So, in this way, the inner life of the Godhead is completely self-sufficient. There is the Son, the object of God's love, so that God doesn't need any created world of finite beings as the necessary object of his love, so that he can be love. You see? So then, the created world is something extraneous. It's something that the Lord threw off in a fit of exuberance. And although it is very much beloved by him, he doesn't in any way depend on it. He, in a sense, fathered it, but he fathered it out of nothing. It had no true mother. And so in a way it's an orphan. And the relationship between the creator and the creature in popular Christianity has always been the relationship between the king and the subject. And the relationship between the king and the subject is very, very strange, estranged, because the king, in the archetypes of kingship which existed in the Near East in ancient times and upon which this theological imagery was originally modeled, the king was really afraid. He always appeared in the throne room with his back to the wall. He didn't stand in the middle of his people and say, you know, and look around at everybody like that. He stood with his back to the wall like this. It's funny how all altars, Buddhas and things have their backs to the wall, because there you can't be stabbed. And you have your guards and your henchmen on either side of you. And all the people prostrate themselves, because that way you can watch them all. They can't see you and you can see them. So you're safe. And that's the imagery, you see, which has given us our Western conception of God. Of the father whose children have become a little bit too much for him. He's had too many. And they have to be kept in their place. And so he's a little bit frightened. And so the rules are set up. You just do so and so and so and so. And you must feel grateful for having been fathered. You're a miserable worm, and therefore inwardly, because without me you might not have been. You owe everything you have to my having produced you, and you are a debtor. And because you are a debtor, you have a duty. Duty is the same word as debt, debit. You owe life to me who produced you, although I won't admit I had a great deal of fun doing it. And so you must all crawl. Now, you see, that conception of our relationship to reality has been the popular idea for centuries in the Western world. So that you never really knew where you stood with the authority. Because the authority gives you the impression that you are so bad intrinsically that at any time you ought to be punished and eaten up. And it's only a matter of mercy that you're not being eaten up. So the prayers of the Christian church are full of the idea, "O Lord, we are not worthy. And since it is only of thy great mercy that we continue to survive at all, we humbly beseech thee," etc., etc. Imagine going around with that feeling about the nature of reality, that it is watching you all the time, that you're always on probation, like a released prisoner. And therefore there is an all-seeing eye at every moment of the day and night surveilling you, much more efficiently than any big brother could watch you through tiny TV cameras in your bedroom. I know a friend of mine who is a devout Catholic, and in her toilet, but she is different, she has a sense of humor. And in the toilet, you know, it's an old-fashioned one, there's a tank and a pipe coming down to the john. And there's a little placard on it with a big eye painted. And in Gothic letters underneath it, it says, "Thou, God, seest me." So always, everywhere, according to this mythology, there is the eye of the paternal judge watching you. Now, what can you do with a situation like that? If that's the way things really are, you don't know whether this Lord has a sense of humor, and whether you can say to him, "Hey, look, don't take such an advantage of me like that. Turn down that light a little. Close off your eyes sometimes. You don't need to be all that particular. You know I can't do anything to you. I can't knock you over. Why do you need to bug me all the time?" Sort of attitude is too much. And so people couldn't stand it. You know, 600 years of it was enough. And it became intolerable. Really intolerable. Because everybody knew they were sinners, and that they were doing all the things against the rules in the book, and nobody could possibly put up with it. So the only thing they could do to relieve themselves of this horrible father figure was to make out that the universe didn't have a father at all. That it was really an orphan. Not even virgin born. It didn't even have a mother. In other words, in order to escape from the mythology of a conception of ultimate reality, which was much too intelligent and much too nosy, people had to invent a conception of the ultimate reality that was completely banal and dead. So the second Western mythology is the mythology of the mechanical universe, which is a fluke emerging from a process of absolutely blind energy, which in 19th century Vienna was exceedingly uncomplimentary. Libido, blind lust. And so in the same way, the science philosophers of the 19th century talked about the world as being based on brute force, unintelligent energy, and worked out a conception of man as a really rather unfortunate natural fluke. Consciousness, reason, and indeed also the passions and feelings and desires of the human heart were nothing but the end product of a roulette wheel of natural selection. It's a most curious paradox that those philosophers of the 19th century who denied the supernatural origin of man and who insisted that man is simply a part of nature, one of the members of nature, nevertheless set up a state of alienation between man and nature without precedent. I am a part of nature. I am something that nature fluked into being, but nevertheless, this fluke is something that nature doesn't care about. It doesn't care about my ego and its future. All that is important to nature is the species. The individual is irrelevant. At the same time, this philosophy arose when we were becoming conscious of this sheer magnitude of the universe. And it took the first impression of this vastness as a pretext for making little of human beings and saying, what do you matter in this huge cosmos? You're just a little fluke. You're just a little nothing at all. This thing goes way on beyond all imagination. And therefore man is just so much fungus on a rock, and a very tiny rock at that. In other words, it took the standpoint, let's set up a scale between two limits. This is the traditional Western opposition. On the one end of the scale to the left here, you have matter, the inert, the clay put into shape by the potter. On the other end of the scale, you have spirit, which is intelligence. And these are what the mathematicians call limits. And a limit is something you approach, but you never actually get there. Now, what the 19th century mythology did was to think of all things towards the limit called matter. It said, in effect, there is this dead material stuff. It is energetic, but the energy is unintelligent. It's a kind of roaring mechanical energy like fire or electricity or so on. It is not intelligent. And everything is really that. What we call human intelligence and consciousness are merely complicated forms of this primordial energy. And they are nothing but that. In the same way, we are evolved from lower orders of animals. And I can trace my ancestry to a protoplasmal globule, Pupa says. And, that's what you really are. You're only a complicated protoplasmal globule. Now, do you see the intent behind this mythology? The intent is to deprecate. The intent is, as we say now, to put down the human being, because the human being felt that hitherto he had been put up too far in the wrong way. You are a child of God, and the Lord loves you very dearly, but, that's just insufferable, to be put up in that way. You have an immortal soul. Your life is endless, but it can very well turn out to be a life of endless agony when you fry in hell. And that was a very serious threat to both Protestants and Catholics. And so it's much better, much more comfortable to have a dead universe than a living universe so everlastingly threatening. So then, the mythology of the 19th century, under which most of us still operate, because we operate under it because it has become so plausible. The science out of which this mythology arose has been so effective. It has produced such a marvelous splash of technological marvels that its point of view, or the point of view of those scientists who started the whole thing going, has become amazingly persuasive and convincing. After all, if I can reach into your brain with a very, very subtle instrument, and I can poke about inside and press there, and suddenly, on a certain point when I press it, a world of memory comes to life so vividly that you see it before your very eyes. I remove the instrument, it vanishes. I touch another place. You experience intense pleasure, absolutely unbelievable pleasure. I remove it, the sensation vanishes. Every time I touch inside, you get a sensation externally of intense reality. And I say, after all, I was only just pushing things in your brain. You see what a push-button thing you are? That's it. I can just poke around and you can see anything. But all that's happening is I'm putting a little electrode or something on certain parts of your brain. That's all you are, poor fish. You're just that kind of a sensitive sponge inside your head bone. Well, that gets very persuasive, you see. And people are therefore in a position, they are prejudiced to favor a mythology that will make out that you are, after all, nothing but something or other. Nothing but a kind of complicated neurological jello. And that point of view, as I said, has become enormously convincing. It's plausible today, whereas the old point of view of God the Father and all the angels isn't plausible. It seems kind of weird in relation to what we know about the state of the universe. Now, what we have to see is that both of these points of view are equally mythological. And there's no more reason to take one than the other. And that what these points of view reflect are nothing other than certain attitudes to living. Now you see, if you want to live in a way that always is saying, I think that life is disgusting. Supposing you want to deny being, then you can always describe it in ways that are offensive. You can always say playing the violin is just scraping cat's entrails with horsehair. That puts it down, and you say, and you say people who play golf, they're a bunch of idiots who go out on take a walk, and they hit a stupid little ball with sticks. Or that people who like music are just a bunch of idiots who sit around and go out of their minds listening to a lot of complicated noises. See, there's always a way of talking about something to make it sound terrible. Equally, There's a way of talking about something to make it sound great. Now, what do you want to do? Do you want to live your life in such a way that you're always saying to it, you know? You want to, is that a good way to conduct things? Or do you want to live your life in such a way that you say, come on, let's go. You see, let's swing this thing. On the one hand, you see, you're always in tension against it. Do you remember I pointed out to you in this morning that the person who's anxious, constantly anxious, is the person who is resisting the flip-flopability of things. Life is vibrating, it's going bloop, 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 bloop all the time, and the anxious person says, God's sake, don't do that. Because, you know, you might do it too much. I don't want to blurp like this, it makes me feel nervous. Stop it. And so, as he puts his weight on this blip, blip, he goes like this, you see, it gets tripping. So instead of saying, come on, let's blip, see, let's go, and do this thing, so in exactly the same way, the person who wants to say, well, you're nothing but some kind of chemicals, and they're just a lot of, you're a bag of pus and blood, basically, with a few bones inside. And that person is doing the same thing, you see, as the person who's putting pressure on the flip-flopability of things, and so he gets anxious. And the person who does this, he wants to say, he's always, look, think about your friends and the people who are philosophical and enthusiastic materialists. They're always going to pose themselves as a certain kind of hero. After all, you're just a dreamer, but I face facts. See? I'm a hard-headed realist. And as a matter of fact, I'm an intellectual porcupine. I have my prickles out all over the place. Because I'm the kind of person who, in the academic world at any rate, is full of rigor. I ask, what precisely is the evidence about this? And I'm analytical. And believe in, I don't like woolly and vague thinking. I like it clear cut. And you can see that porcupine's bristle going right through like that. See, well, this is a personality type who wants to play that role, whose message in saying all this jazz is, I'm the kind of person who is all dry as a bone. But I believe that that is strength, and that's reality. And another kind of person says to him, oh, you are intolerable. You're so dry, you're so dull, you rattle. You don't have any juice in you. And what we need is juice. And we need flow. We need lilt and rhythm and gaiety, you see. So that's an opposed mythology. And that's another character part you're going to play. So we've got to consider these are games, you see, as I tried to show you earlier. The kind of roles we play are the kind of games we play. So, but the question is, which is the optimal game? Certainly we can't do without some prickly people, because life is prickles and goo. And it's basically gooey prickles and prickly goo, but the gooey people are always trying to make out that it's only goo, and the prickly people are always trying to make out it's only prickles. And we do need both, see? But the question is fundamentally, which game works better? The game that resists the vibration, the flip-flop, or the game that goes with it? Obviously, the game that goes with it, that cooperates with the general scene, will be a longer game and a more amusing game than one that totally resists it. Although, I said totally advisedly, because it's great fun to resist it at times. See, it's just like when somebody massages you, you know, and they're really expert and those fingers are just vibrating like this on your back. You can give and just go woof. But it's also fun sometimes to tighten yourself, your muscles against it, so as to feel the full impact of this thing, see? But what I want to, the real point I want to get across is that what seems to us the hard-boiled common sense of a mechanistic view of the universe is nothing other than a myth. You don't have to be taken in by this, because there is no more solid argument that that is the way things are than any other argument about any other way things might be. Now, it goes like this, you see. Again, think of the idea of limits. We'll take different limits this time. We'll take one limit on the right hand here as consciousness. Extreme, lively sensitivity. And on the other hand, we'll take the opposite limit, which is geological. The stone, the blind energy, the electrical force without any consciousness whatsoever. These are observable things. We see the living human being on one extreme, and we see the stone or the fire on the other. Now, our 19th century mythologist wants to describe this limit in terms of this one. He wants to say that consciousness is nothing but a very complicated form of minerals. Why can't you go the other way and just as easily say minerals are a very simple form of consciousness? That works, doesn't it? I mean, after all, here's this mineral. I knock it, and it says that to me. This is a rudimentary form of consciousness. This thing inside is not making a noise to itself, because that requires ears. But in some way, this thing is going to itself. It's shaking like that. And that's its consciousness, its response, its resonance. It isn't totally unconscious, but its consciousness is extremely simple. Now, you may think I'm spinning fairy stories, but is that any more of a fairy story than to say that your consciousness is nothing but chemistry? I mean, you think you're conscious, and that you have this high and mighty state of affairs, but actually, of course, if we look at this very realistically, all this is just colloidal substances bubbling around. See, both that story and the other story can be made to seem equally fanciful. But the question is this: if I say about the gong, look, my friend, I respect you because you are a little bit conscious. See, you relate to me. You're kind of a younger brother, and then there's something endearing and warm about this attitude to things. Whereas if I say, you're just a piece of metal, and as a matter of fact, I'm just a piece of metal too, that's a kind of insult. Now, the people who believe that are really suicidal maniacs. They want to put themselves down. They are against their own life, and they take a great pride in being that way, and they call it being realistic. And I'm only saying it's a better gamble to take it the other way and say the best thing you can say about it, that this is a living being, but not so much of a living being as a snail or something that actually wanders along and wiggles. So you see, the pressure upon us of the whole mythology of the 19th century, the whole attitude of putting down the universe because the previous myth had been too uncomfortably alive, is simply a way of looking at things. Let me give another illustration of the same thing. If you study the various forms of life from the standpoint of natural selection, you may come up with a rationalization for everything. Somebody wants to know, why do butterflies have eyes on their wings? Some butterflies. Well, somebody scratches his head and says, oh, well, there must be an explanation for that. There's an explanation for everything. Why is there an explanation for everything? Because the universe is really a tight engineering job. So, why do some butterflies have eyes? Well, it so happened that some fluke of a butterfly once got an eye on its wing, and birds would avoid it because that eye looked at them and it was just too much. So those butterflies that had eyes on their wings bred not more easily. Although some of them had other alternatives, because of not having eyes, they were invisible. And so more of that kind survived, although those with the terrifying eyes survived. And so they did. Well, this is a perfectly easy, simple explanation of why butterflies have eyes on their wings. As other things, some birds with extraordinary plumages, which look so obvious that anybody could catch them, any cat, any hunter. No, they survived because they were so attractive to their females. And so they bred very well. As a matter of fact, this isn't true, they didn't. And, but any explanation will do, provided it seems to explain. Now, that is one way of looking at things. You can make an extremely consistent theory for the different kind of species of flowers and birds and insects and all their markings and so on, just why they have them. But on the other hand, you can equally well explain it in a completely different way. You can say, it would be exceedingly dreary if there were nothing but one uniform type of life. Supposing there had never been anything but amoebas, and there were just globules, and they divided, and then they divided again, and then they divided again. You know, that could have gone on and it could have been terribly efficient, because the minute you went to hit an amoeba, you would strike it, but suddenly find you'd killed only one of them because it split just before you hit. It's a marvelous arrangement. And you know, they could split very fast. You could suddenly go at another with two hammers, hoping to catch both amoebas, but suddenly they split, and there were 8 of them before you knew where you were. That would be fine. But actually, the reason why there is all this colossal variety and all these patterns on butterflies' wings is that nature is a poet and is simply having a wonderful time making all this variety and doing all these various things. And that explanation is just as plausible as the efficient explanation. You see, the philosophy is to a large extent a matter of taste. What sort of explanations suit your personality? If you're an anal retentive type and rather tight, then you like the efficient explanation. On the other hand, if you're an effusive type, you like the poetic explanation. But there are, though, beyond that, certain considerations of which of these explanations affords better games. And the economic anal retentive explanation can give good games up to a point, because there's all the thrill of working out the chains of interconnection, all the reasoning whereby finally you go through all sorts of rational connections and explain why the butterfly has a big eye on its wing. Fine. But where do you end up? You end up in a mechanical straitjacket. You've got to be careful along the other line of approach that you just don't end up in a morass. You could do that. So you look for a middle way. But the point that emerges from all this is don't be bamboozled into fearing the black will win. Because the white is the only thing there is. And the black, the nothing that surrounds it, will eventually engulf it. All these are, as it were, nursery stories to terrify children. You live in a cosmos where the light of consciousness and the darkness of unconsciousness go back and forth, just as the crests and the troughs of the waves. And this situation of yang and yin, positive and negative, is exceedingly productive. It's like a male and a female who become the parents of all sorts of children. And out of yang and yin, black and white, come all these adventures through the original stratagem of pretending that the one is and the other isn't, that yang is and that yin isn't. Both have equally good arguments on their side, and one now wins and the other now wins. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But don't be deceived. The two are always together. And the thing that you most fear, the awful, awful thing that could happen, think it through. What could that be? What could the very end be? What is it that you dread? And you'll find out that if you go down, 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 down into what you dread, be swallowed up, be annihilated, let the horrible scorpion, spider mother, the octopus thing catch you and take you down into its inmost guts, what will it do with you? Why, it'll transform you into itself. And then when you are it, as I said, every creature feels like it's a human being. Because after all, that's I. So fish, when they've eaten up something and that thing has become, and then the fish looks around and says, gee, that was a good dinner. And it feels human. And the fish looks around and it sees things that aren't fish, and they look like cows and human beings wandering around there. They look like predatory monsters of some kind, awful looking things, ghastly teeth, and weird, inhumane arms and legs on them, not nice, orderly fins and tails and beautiful scales on the side, like a really good person should look. So, this thing of death and of being transformed is where our life reaches a certain point where it has to go bloop. And in the moment you go bloop, you forget. You lose control, you see? That's the sensation. When control is going, you're just on the verge of the crisis where it's going to bloop. And you say, well, where was I? Gee, this is strange. I'm alive. I don't remember where I was before. That's the sensation of coming to birth. And you grow and grow and you become more familiar with this and more familiar. When you're completely familiar, it goes bloop. And you're new all over again. See? It's quite different. never believe, you see, when it gets to the point where we know it's about to go boop, we never believe that it will go into life. We always think it's going to go into something dreadful. But you see, once you know, it's going to keep flipping. And the only thing is to go with that flip. See, get ready to go. Are you ready? Boop. Then you can laugh, because you know there's no way out.
What is this world we live in? Is 1 minute always 1 minute?
We will begin by refreshing memories as to what went before. In discussing the theme of the Joker, I have been talking about a point of view, the Joker's point of view, from which not only our social institutions, but also all the formations of the natural world are seen as games. Be careful of the word game. It doesn't mean as trivialities, because when we say it's just a game, this often means it is just trivial. There can be important games, as when we play the piano or musical instruments. We are not necessarily doing something frivolous, but we are playing. And there is something in the nature of all play that is not serious, but at the same time may be sincere. And I tried to give you the picture of the multiplicity of natural forms on the one hand, and of human social institutions, and all the things that we do and consider important and busy ourselves with as human beings. I tried to give you the point of view from which these can be seen as games, as things being done, as it were, simply for themselves, and not for some ulterior motive. And therefore, these games are in a way best played when they are played as games. Although it's really all right for people to take them seriously, except that they are a little bit deprived. They're missing something. And so when the Joker sees a person taking his life seriously and regarding himself as extremely important, there is something a little bit funny about it, and he is inclined to get the giggles. And it's all he knows, that the very intensity of seriousness with which the individuals concerned are taking these games will be a kind of foil for the subsequent bursting into laughter when he sees that it wasn't serious after all. You see that? You might say there are these classes of people. There are the very far out people and the very far in people. Now, ordinarily, we say someone's very far out when they are oddballs, when they are exceedingly unconventional. But I want you to turn the picture round and look as a conventional person. Look at a square as a person who's very far out. That is to say, he is so involved in the seriousness of the game he is playing that he is lost. He doesn't know where he started from and he thinks he's there. But he's completely lost because he is actually under the cover of his assurance, of his status, of his position in society. He's really a very anxious person. I said a lot yesterday about the way in which our society shows anxiety because it cannot permit the existence of people who don't belong. And it cannot really permit the criticism of laughter. It cannot permit the presence of the old-fashioned court jester. Because these people are so far out. They're so involved, and from a certain standpoint, you see, from the Joker's standpoint, he doesn't condemn such people. He rather congratulates them on their heroism for getting so lost and involved. But to keep the far-out people from going quite insane, there have to be far-in people. And the far-in people are those who keep contact with the original goings-on behind the scenes. They are like the prompter in the theater, where there are the actors out on the stage, relying on their memories, etc., and they're supposed to get completely involved in the play. But there's a concealed prompter with the script in front of him. And he is the connection of the actor on the stage with the green room behind the stage. And you see in this dramatic analogy of the universe, the green room is the central point, the still point of the turning world. The green room is how God is when he's back home, not involved in all these games, and takes off the mask. See, on the Hindu theory that everybody is a mask of God. Like a wonderful line in one of Chesterton's poems. And now a great thing in the street seems any human nod, where move in strange democracy the million masks of God. The million masks of the Joker, because the Joker is the player, the trick player, who plays ultimately the great trick on himself. So really, there can be no resentment about this. Nobody to blame, nobody to turn around to in the end and say, you bastard, you did this to me. Because it's always you who are ultimately responsible. So, this prompter, you see, keeps the actor on the stage in touch with the green room. And so there are certain people in the world who might be a kind of a priesthood sometimes, although priesthoods are apt to become corrupt and square. But a kind of people in the know. There always has to be somebody around in the know, so that, as it were, the wheel of society and of existence, the wheel of the squirrel cage, the wheel of the rat race, can have an axle firmly planted. And at the center then there have to be the far-in people. So this is the domain of jokers. Now, having developed that side of the Joker, the person who sees through the social institutions as games, I went on in the second session to discuss another aspect of the Joker as the sly man, in comparison with the monk, the fakir, and the yogi, who undertake all those three, undertake in certain different ways disciplines which have the intent of releasing them from their karma. The individual, in other words, challenges his involvement, his attachments, his limitations, his finitude, and endeavors to overcome it. But in each of these three cases, the individual involved stirs up an immense opposition, because he serves notice upon the devil or shall we say upon his karmic creditors, that he is about to leave town. And so all the creditors come rushing to the door. All his past sins catch up with him. And the devil lays his temptations in the way all the more thoroughly. So that the sly man is the one who, when he is going to leave town, does so instantaneously without any prior announcement. And so in this way there is, shall we say, a cunning manner of becoming a Buddha. And that is to become one instantly, without any preparation or warning whatsoever. This is why Zen is called the sudden school, and why Satori is a sudden awakening. Because it has to be done without the slightest warning. Now, but then I pointed out that the moment you have any idea about doing this, you've already ceased to be sudden. That is to say, the moment you seek for some spiritual attainment, which is becoming a Buddha, becoming awakened, becoming released, getting in there, you've already served notice upon your creditors. So that somehow or other you find that you have to do it without intending to do it. And that is a double bind, which you impose upon yourself when you say, I must find a way of doing this spontaneously. That's the old basic double bind. You must be spontaneous. You are commanded, or you command yourself to do something which is acceptable only if it happens spontaneously. Then you think about that and say, well, what a fix that is. Here am I saying, I must be surprised, and I'm going to lay plans to surprise myself. So by going through this, you discover naturally that can't be done. You can't surprise yourself on purpose. Yet that's what you have to do. So what about it? You come to a state of total paralysis. You're stuck. The one thing that is terribly important to be done can't be done. It has to happen. It really does if you do anything about it, either actively. But then as you begin to see what you are doing all the time, you notice a very odd fact, which is that you can't help being spontaneous. If I say to you, good morning, and you say good morning, what is that? Did you plan this answer? Did you make preparations to grow your hair? Do you make decisions about having blue eyes? You see, about breathing? Is this all planned? About beating your heart? And what about your thinking? Even if it's very blocked thinking, even if you feel from a certain point of view that you're all mixed up, what is going on anyway? You see, you can't stop it. It's like trying to, we were discussing the Gurdjieff thing yesterday, the self-remembering exercise, the attempt to live completely in the present. Well, that's not only a Gurdjieff idea, that's a very ancient yoga and Buddhist discipline, to be completely here and now. But of course, as you pursue this, you discover you can't do it, because you couldn't even, know where to go shopping unless you made plans and started thinking about the future. You couldn't move. But then you discover, you see, that in the long run, there's nothing to think about except the here and now. There really isn't anything else. Because even when you make plans for the future and you remember the past, you're doing it all in the present. Your memory is a present activity. There's no way of not being self-remembering and having presence of mind. So when you discover that, there's nothing left to you but to have a good laugh. Well, now, I want to develop to a greater extent something I only touched on yesterday afternoon when we were discussing anxiety and laughter and the relationship between the two. I suggested that anxiety and laughter are really the same phenomenon, but seen from different points of view. As we all know, we can have shudders of horror and shudders of delight, tears of grief and tears of joy. And it's the same shudders and the same tears in either case, but they have a completely different meaning. Now, life is a matter of oscillation. Life is vibration. It's the whole time and all the way through. The question is, how are you going to interpret that? Is it tremble, 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 or is it laugh, laugh, laugh? That's the great thing. And sometimes it's one, and sometimes it's the other. So that the whole thing of the Joker is he comes into being, as it were, at the point when the anxiety interpretation of the trembling becomes the laughing interpretation. We were talking about monks who had skulls in their cells to remind them of mortality. And we think a grim thing. The skull is a grim thing. But Chesterton had the poem about the skull. Chattering finch and waterfly are not merrier than I. Here among the flowers I lie, laughing everlastingly. No, I may not tell the best. Surely, friends, I might have guessed death was but the good king's jest. It was hid so carefully. So you can see the skull not as a grim thing, but as a laughing thing. It's all that's left of a human being. And all the surface is peeled off. And nothing but this beautiful bone remains. It laughs. Now why? What is it about death being a jest? We discussed the problem of the zebra. You remember? Whether a zebra is a yellow horse with black stripes or a black horse with yellow stripes. And of course, you can see it either way. And you can argue till all is blue about which side is right. And let's suppose that a black horse is a horse of ill omen, even though striped with yellow. And a yellow horse, a horse of joy and good omen, even though striped with black. This is our eternal problem. We are in the state of egocentric consciousness, firmly convinced that death is a threat. We are so convinced of this, even though individuals may say, well, I'm not really afraid of death. What I'm afraid of is dying in an unpleasant way. Nevertheless, since almost all moralists and people concerned with ethics seem to agree, whatever their differences of opinion, that survival is a good thing. In some sense, if not survival in this body, even the most, the people who would rather be dead than red, firmly believe that that is true because they believe there is a hereafter, where they can go and where they can be rewarded for the courageous stand against evil which they have taken. You see? So that's still some kind of insistence on the value of survival. And we all cling to this idea of survival with tremendous passion. But we have been fooled, because survival is an important ideal only so long as you have bothering you the bugbear of death, that the world might stop altogether, and that your death, so far as you are concerned, is curtains forever. And that is really the bogey. But if you think about it deeply, there are several, or indeed the whole life of the cosmos might be nothing but a flash, and beyond that, nothing. Nothing in all directions. When, for example, we think of the physicist's idea that the universe is running down, that all energy is seeking a stable state. Supposing, for example, to give an illustration of what they mean, I have a jar of black pepper and a jar of salt, and I pour them together in it. Then I start shaking the jar. And slowly, the black and the white disappear into a gray. That can never be sorted out again into black and white. In this sort of way, as things go on, the universe, they say, it tends to attain a stable state, to run down until that's the end. And nobody knows how it could possibly start all over again. But I always say, and I feel it in a sort of funny, intuitive way, that what happened once can happen again. If this world started at some time, supposing there was a colossal explosion which set all these galaxies flying out, then what existed before that explosion must surely have been something like the stable state to which we shall run down in the end. And if it went bang once, there's absolutely no reason why it shouldn't go bang again. I suppose there are temperaments in logic. I have a temperament whereby I just cannot, it seems to me absolutely basic that what happened once can happen again. But there are other people who so cherish the unique that they can conceive the idea of something like existence happening only once. But you see, something that happens only once doesn't happen at all. What happens if a given sound consists of only one vibration? What is the upcrest of a wave apart from the downcrest? Can you conceive that? That's the same koan as what is the sound of one hand. You see, it always takes two. You can't have a purely left-sided person. Imagine. So, in this way, just as you can't have just one vibration, it's like the saying, the greatest strength of mind is to eat one peanut. and so it can hardly be done. So there isn't just one vibration, and a dit but no da sort of thing. You have to have it do more. So in just the same way, when you magnify this principle, there isn't just one cosmos, or one big explosion that starts and stops. All stopping implies starting. Someone just wrote to me, we haven't parted because we never met. So the whole point of saying this is the realization that existence is eternal. The going out of existence implies the coming in. And St. Thomas had some points here when he said, there could never have been a time when there was not being, because if there had been a time when there was nothing in nothing to produce something. But he didn't quite have the point, because what he didn't see was that nothing is productive in the sense that you can't have nothing without something. They go together. And all this thing is an argument, again, about whether the zebra is yellow striped black or black striped yellow. And what we see is that the black and the yellow, the darkness and the light, are simply two phases of the same. And that realization is exactly what transforms anxiety into laughter. Suddenly to see that you just, after all this anxiety, that you don't have anything to worry about. Now, that doesn't mean that there will not in our future lie some extremely painful experiences, or experiences that we would ordinarily interpret as horribly painful. We may all die of ghastly diseases, or of radiation burns, or of unimaginable things. But look here. I very briefly touched on pain yesterday and the way pain is interpreted. If you interpret pain as something that is destroying you and is going in the direction of total death, then it's very serious indeed. And it's perfectly terrifying. But I've been investigating experiences of people who've undergone torture. I don't know if anybody in this room has. It's always possible. But, and then if so, you can correct me. But the worst part of torture is the beginning. When, of course, you're full of all your illusions and all your fears about black and white and the terror that black may win. But it's said that as torture proceeds, it slowly changes the state of mind of the victim to a kind of drunken, masochistic giving in to the torture, so that it becomes something that he cooperates with. And that if the torturer notices this, he knows he's through and has to kill him. So, in other words, there is a point at which pain becomes an experience without having a negative interpretation put upon it. Becomes, in other words, converted into ecstasy. It simply becomes, you see, a way of going through extraordinarily far out sensations which have no meaning. If they have meaning, the meaning of threat, the meaning of death looming at the end, and you know this is the tearing apart and the destruction of you, then you see it is absolutely horrendous. But if it has no meaning at all, just transpose yourself into another dimension to illustrate it, because what the dimension I'm talking about is a very tough one. But let's go back to a simpler one. Let's take sounds. Now, if you lie down and listen to all the goings on in this area, and you will hear planes moving and cars and foghorns and all kinds of crazy sounds, you see, people this way and that, so on. And you can listen to that and find it very interesting, very beautiful. But if someone were to do what John Cage does and put you in a concert hall with the expectation of hearing music, and by having a purely silent playing of the piano, compel you instead to listen to all the sounds going on around you, you would be shocked and feel that some kind of an avant-garde hoax had been perpetrated. You see, it depends on the set, on the way you approach the experience. Now, you can listen to sounds that are ordinarily considered unpleasant in a totally unprejudiced way. You can listen to discordant musical noises and find them extremely interesting if you listen carefully enough.